APA is very privileged to have one of the most sought after Ayurvedic scholars in contemporary times of Ayurveda, Dr. Ram Manohar. Ram Manohar is a leading researcher in the field of Ayurveda, and there have been several contributions which are significant in changing the view of Ayurveda in the scientific world. And currently, Vaidya Ram Manohar is serving as research director at Amrita Center for Advanced Research in Ayurveda, which is linked to Amrita University in Kerala, in Kollam. And Dr. Ram has just mentioned that, he has got lots of birds very close to where he's going to be presenting from. So if you hear some of the chirping of the birds, it's not a technical disturbance, but it's actually where Ram is. It's a beautiful place, Kollam in Kerala. Before I hand over to Ram to do his presentation, I'd just like to mention one of the significant contributions of Ram, which many who are in the research field of Ayurveda know and see as an example, is when Ram was the principal investigator on the Indian side of the National Institute of Health, USA, which, NIH USA, they sponsored a study to scientifically evaluate the value of Ayurveda in rheumatoid arthritis. And this has received global attention amongst researchers. And in fact, this research won Excellence in Integrative Medicine Research Award from the European Society of Integrative Medicine. And Ram holds very key roles as an advisor to many governmental and other research organizations within India and outside. And Ram is an excellent teacher, an excellent orator. All credits is not just for Ram, it really comes from Ram's lineage. Ram's father was a very well-respected scholar in India, so he has the advantage of the genetic pool. And today we are going to be talking about cancer, which for many decades we have been focusing on the importance of genetics. And you see the word Jiva Paramanu mentioned, Ram, and I hope that you're going to be enjoying Ram's rich scholarly knowledge and his way how he approaches looking at Ayurveda, and he explains as much as I do. So it's a great privilege, Ram, to have you do this for the APA. So I'll hand over to you, Ram, to start the webinar.
Thank you, Vijay, for the warm introduction. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today morning to share my thoughts on how we can develop an Ayurvedic understanding of cancer. And today my focus is on the conceptual basis of Ayurveda, and it's not just on practical tips on how to treat cancer, but much more on how we can have a comprehensive understanding of cancer from the theoretical framework, so that meaningful approaches to its management can also be kind of visualized. So I think I will start my presentation with the help of my slides. Just a moment while I share the slides. Yes. So in today's discussion, I wanted to bring in this Ayurvedic perspective, because today when we talk about cancer, of course, it's the modern biomedical understanding that we are very much familiar with, which is based on the biomolecular understanding of how the human body functions, especially the cellular or organization of the human body. So when we talk about cancer, immediately what comes to our mind is, the cells that have uh, gone astray and start multiplying and, form this tumor. So that's the basic understanding, I think, that anybody today in the world has about what cancer means. So we'll try to look at this whole understanding of cancer in modern terms, because cancer itself is a modern terminology. One of the challenges is to find out what would be the equivalent in the Ayurvedic texts. Was cancer at all understood in Ayurveda in the way we understand it today? So these are some thoughts that we have to ponder upon as we begin our discussion. And I have put this as the title of our talk today: the free fear and retaliation of the Jiva Paramanu, which I think encapsulates the Ayurvedic understanding of how cancer develops. So first and foremost, about this term Jiva Paramanu, of course, that's not what cancer means in Ayurveda. I purposefully brought this term into our discussion because it helps us to bridge some conceptual frameworks to create a narrative that will make sense both from the modern biomedical understanding as well as from the Ayurvedic perspective. So let me ask, how many of you have heard of this term, Jiva Paramanu? Anybody is already familiar with that, or is this something completely new? I hope I can begin with a question. Yes, just to get a sense of, how familiar you are. Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Yes.
I am familiar with the Anu means atom. I'm familiar, and Jiva is life. So
Yes.
I'm assuming that Jiva Paramanu would be the great cells of life.
Right. Yes, I think you made a very intelligent guess with the Sanskrit terms. But I was also asking whether you are familiar with this concept apart from what the Sanskrit term implies.
We've got a few people in the chat box that have said it's new to me.
Yes.
And can I just say to everybody, can questions go in the chat box really rather than breaking in? Can everybody stay on to silent? So yeah, there's a completely new to me. So it's
Right.
kind of, there's quite a few news, just so that you can, without having to try and read all the chat box and present, that's what it's saying.
Right. So I guess if there's nobody saying that it's already known, then I will take it that this is completely new. So unless somebody is familiar with it, I think there's no need for a response. And if there's no further responses, I take it that it is new, because that's very important for me to decide how much I must dwell upon this concept. So let's look at a small video clip in the beginning, just to visualize this whole cancer. I hope the video is visible now.
Yes.
We know that in our body, our cells are continuously dividing, multiplying, and dying a natural death and then being renewed. So this is a very dynamic process. And just for one moment, just to visualize this whole process and what happens in cancer as we understand today. So what we saw just now was the normal cell division. And what we understand today happens in cancer. So as we can see from this video, one of the key characteristics of in the development of cancer is at the speed at which cells divide. And I'm just showing this picture because, when we come to the Ayurvedic concepts, it becomes quite easy to relate to even the Ayurvedic terminology for cancer in the light of this very, very basic understanding that anybody has, even non-medical people, the common intelligent layperson knows that cancer is all about unregulated cell division. So in Ayurveda, we have this interesting concept of Paramanu. This is there in the darshanas, or the basic knowledge systems, the physical world being reduced to the minutest particle, which is called as Anu, or the Paramanu means the ultimate, particle, which is beyond sensory perception, which makes up this whole universe. So it's all in the world of physical sciences, it corresponds to the atom or the subatomic world. In fact, the Paramanu in Sanskrit is not just the atom. It is, the subatomic particle. It's at the point, it's something very much related to quantum mechanics, where you have, that state of matter in which the particle then dissolves into a wave. So it's Parama Anu. When you say Anu, we might even talk about it as atom, but Paramanu is even more, minute. So this is very, very interesting. And in the context of biology, usually we do not have this idea of Paramanu, but in one textbook, in Charaka Samhita, we have this in the section on anatomy, there is this discussion that the parts of the human body, when you look at them in terms of Paramanu, they become innumerable. So this is quite a fascinating idea that, this chapter itself is called as Sharira Sankhya, means counting the organs of the body. And this chapter tells that while we are trying to count all the organs and parts of the body and enumerate them, if you look at it microscopically, then the body is made up of minute components, which are uncountable. Aparisankheyani. Why? Because of their sheer numbers, ati bahutvat. There's so much that you can never stop counting them. And ati saukshmiya, they're extremely small. And atindriyatvat, because you cannot visualize them with your sense organs. I mean, you cannot see that with your naked eye. I mean, you will need some aid or tool. So it's quite fascinating to see that in the classical Ayurvedic text, the Charaka Samhita alone, we come across this fascinating description of the microscopic organization, the microscopic dimension of the human body, where it is made up of these minute units, which the text calls as Paramanu, or as many of the later commentators call them as Jiva Paramanu, distinguishing them from, the building blocks of the physical material world. So these are the smallest biological units in the human body. And while I cannot make a claim that the classical Ayurvedic texts were referring to the cells as we understand today, because for want of very clear descriptions on what these Jiva Paramanus are, we cannot really make a correlation. But if you look at it closely, as I will do in the next few slides, you can find that this picture of the body being a collection of innumerable Jiva Paramanus is very, very similar to the modern idea of the cellular organization of the human body. Because after the discussion of these Paramanus, the text also says that these Paramanus are undergoing continuous samyoga and viyoga. They are multiplying, they are combining to form different organs of the body, they are disintegrating, and the factors that are responsible for this differentiation of these Paramanus and their organization into various, as we understand today, tissues and organs, the factor behind this is Vayu, and also the karma of the individual. I remember some years ago, there was a theory that from a group of scientists who were looking at how cancer cell behaves, that it almost looks like God is playing dice, that cancer develops by mere chance, that mutations are continuously happening, and whether a cell turns into cancer is completely decided by chance. Of course, this was very much disputed and debated, because on the whole, as we will see later, it's only about 5%, 5 to 10% of cancers are considered genetic, and majority of cancers are today known to be caused by what is called as modifiable risk factors. But in Ayurveda, when we say karma, it includes also, conscious human actions, modifiable risk factors. So the fact that the classical Ayurvedic text talks about Vayu and the karma of the individual as two important factors, which we will later discuss in the development of cancer. That's the point I wanted to make here. And we will discuss this in the context of the pathogenesis of cancer from the Ayurvedic perspective. So the concept of innumerable paramanus in the human body that are beyond the scope of unaided direct perception. We can find the earliest notions of cellular organization of the human body and factors influencing cell division and apoptosis as we understand it today. So I would also like to bring attention to another interesting concept in the Charaka Samhita. But for some of these passages in this textbook, we would perhaps never even be able to develop this kind of a microscopic modeling of the human body from the Ayurvedic perspective. So in the 16th chapter of the Sutrasthana of Charaka Samhita, there is a very interesting doctrine, the theory of spontaneous destruction. So this theory tells that all body components are continuously being destroyed. Even before we can even think about it, the body is being rebuilt. It's being destroyed and rebuilt continuously. And this is called as Swabhava Uparama. That is, every part of the human body is going through spontaneous destruction. And this is very similar to the modern idea of, apoptosis or programmed cell death, that every part of the human body has a very short lifespan, at the microscopic level, and that it is being continuously renewed. And there's a very beautiful theory here. I'll go a little bit more into the Swabhava Uparama Vada, which tells us that body components at the microscopic level are disintegrating and being replaced with new components continuously. So a given component is replaced by the same type of component, which I'm not going to the Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, it's called Santana Parampara, which means one cell is replaced by another cell which has the same, morphological and functional characteristics. And so that it appears as if, there is a static stability. So even though the body is being continuously renewed, because it's rebuilt in the same, blueprint, it appears as though it's the same person. So this is very beautifully explained in the concept of Swabhava Uparama Vada. And there is also a discussion on how pathology develops in this process. So I think the Charaka Samhita is very unique in that it talks about pathology at this microscopic level. So when there is an aberration or defect in the component, then when these microscopic components are replaced, that aberration is perpetuated. When one cell undergoes an aberration and it gives rise to something very similar, that aberration is perpetuated, and then the body goes into a state of imbalance. So this concept is very similar to what today we are explaining in terms of cellular senescence and apoptosis, and what happens, the mutation, how some cells become immortal and perpetuate themselves, creating what we call today as, a malignant cancerous growth. So it's quite interesting that Ayurveda has a theoretical and conceptual framework that allows for us to incorporate even the modern understanding of cancer, even from a very deep philosophical, theoretical perspective. So according to modern understanding, there are three types of cell death. One is apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, which happens naturally, which is called Swabhavoparama. And then autophagy, where the cells, dissolve, digest themselves, which is very similar to the Ayurvedic understanding of Pachana, the process of Pachana. And then necrosis, something which happens due to stress, injury, or pathological conditions. And all these three concepts from the Ayurvedic perspective are very interesting for us to understand how Ayurveda intervenes in cancer. So I'm just introducing this at this point of time. So how do we correct the aberrations of this Paramanu replication? Charaka Samhita describes this very clearly, that we have to break the sequence of, this aberration. And in modern terms, when we stop the mutated cell from perpetuating itself and we reinitiate, the normal cellular reproduction, that is when the Dhatu Samya is re-established. So this is very clearly described in the Charaka Samhita. So by creating a new sequence of this micro-component propagation, I'm using the word micro-component because I don't want to use the word cell, because we do not know whether they really meant cell in the modern sense. But these micro units of life, when we re-establish, when we break the propagation of the aberrations in these micro components, that is when we re-establish Dhatu Samya. So Ayurveda has a very comprehensive theoretical framework on how we can deal with aberrations, at the microscopic level, in how the body maintains itself. So from this perspective, we can see that cancer is a manifestation of a breakdown or a failure in the normal process of the maintenance, the breaking down and rebuilding of the body. And that is why today we know that, everybody has cancer cells. Cancer is a natural, the formation of cancer cells is a natural process in our physiology, as you can see here also from the Ayurvedic perspective. And now let's go a little bit more into how would Ayurveda give us a perspective or understanding. And I want to bring one particular condition in Ayurveda, which does not cover all types of cancers, but nevertheless gives us very interesting insights on how Ayurveda looks at cancer. And this is the word Arbuda. I hope Arbuda is a word that is familiar to all the participants in this group. Yes. So while Jiva Paramanu is something new, Arbuda is definitely much better known, but perhaps many of us do not really know what it actually means. Arbuda is derived from the Sanskrit root Arva Himsayam, Arva meaning to kill. So Arbuda is something that is fatal. And Arbuda also denotes a number, Arbudo Shatakotishu. Arbuda indicates multiplication into hundreds and millions. Koti is, of course, 10 million in Indian, mathematics. It's 10 million. So that which was 1 becomes 100 and then multiplies into 10 million, even before we can think about it. And then it kills that which. So if you were to construct the etymological meaning of Arbuda, then it would mean that which kills by multiplying into hundreds and millions. And I think this is such a graphic description of the whole process of cancer. And the word cancer itself, which means crab, coming from the Greek tradition, sounds so benign. Crab is not such a dangerous thing after all. I don't know why we still use the word cancer for this, such a fatal, dangerous, destructive disease. I think the word Arbuda is much, much more apt. And I will come to this later. I think one of the most beautiful terminologies for cancer, which is so graphic and really denotes the fierceness of this disease, is a word that comes from Siddha system of medicine, not even just Ayurveda, which is Putru. Putru means, it's like the ant hill. The ant hill with so many holes from which poisonous snakes, put their hoods outside. In Siddha system, cancers are called as Putru. In Ayurveda, there is also a disease called Valmika, which means anthill, in which, you know, there are suppurations and spreading of the disease, just like an anthill erupting. So in Ayurveda, it's not the crab, which for us is a very gentle creature. It's not as harmful as the disease cancer, but cancer is something much, much more fierce. And the word Arbuda, as well as the word Valtmika or Putru, denotes this fierce nature and its fatal nature. So I think Arbuda is a very, very graphic terminology. And here, this multiplication of the cells is very aptly captured by the word Arbuda, much more than by the word cancer, or karkinos, I think, as it is called in the Greek tradition. And in Ayurveda, today, of course, we divide cancers into what you call as the solid tumors, and then we have also the hematological tumors, which are not solid. So they cannot be included in Arbuda, and that's another problem. Arbuda doesn't cover all types of cancers. And I'll come to that idea also a little later. But all these solid tumors, what we understand today as solid tumors, would come under the classification of Arbuda and Granthi. And it's quite fascinating that there's quite a lot of detailed description and differentiation between Granthi and Arbuda in Ayurvedic texts. So primary cancers which present as solid tumors are called as Arbuda, which is differentiated from Granthi, which is said to be more benign. And there are amazingly very detailed clinical descriptions and differentiation of Arbuda and Granthi, which I will come to in a little later. But the word Granthi only means knotted appearance. It means knot. Granthi means a knot. So it's only a knotted appearance, something that which forms a knot-like structure, which forms a bulky growth. That is what is called as Granthi. But Arbuda is different because it can kill, and it can multiply at a much more faster pace and in much greater magnitude. So this distinction of solid tumors into Arbuda and Granthi, I think this clinical classification of cancer, I think this is one of the great contributions of Ayurveda, even if you look at it from a historical perspective. It's one of the earliest clinical descriptions and distinguishing between, malignant and non-malignant solid tumors. So the Ayurvedic texts say that these hematological malignancies, which do not form solid tumors, are discussed in Ayurveda under the broad disease category called Pandu, which is very different. So the leukemias come under the classification of Pandu, where anemia and pallor are the predominant symptoms. So they are different from Arbuda. And this is most interesting, that in Ayurveda, cancer is a disease that develops as a sequence. It's a later stage of development. Many chronic diseases can become the foundation for development of cancer according to Ayurveda. So Arbudas are primary tumors, but many diseases can later lead to cancer. As we know today, if you have ulcerative colitis, you are at a risk for developing cancer. If you have ulcers could also turn into cancer. So there are many, many conditions. So we find that cancer-like conditions are described in many other diseases. And some of the other pathologies are, gulma, which can be correlated to abdominal polyps, which are today understood as a risk for, development of cancers, colon cancer. Shotha, even just inflammation and swelling, according to Ayurveda, can lead to the development of cancer. Visarpa, certain type of skin lesions, they can become cancerous at a later stage. So many skin cancers, we can find them under the description of Visarpa. And then even vidradis or abscesses, ulcers, which turn into cancer, even though initially they are not. So this is a very interesting idea in Ayurveda, that there is pre-cancerous condition. So broadly, we see three categories in which we can put cancer in Ayurveda. One is the primary solid tumors, which could be malignant or non-malignant, which is Arbuda or Granthi. And these are described as manifestations of Shobha, which means, according to Ayurveda, long-standing inflammation is one of the biggest risks for development of cancer, even the solid tumors. And then we have the hematological tumors, which are not solid, but like blood cancers, which are described under Pandu. And then chronic conditions that later lead to the development of cancers, like Gulma, Visarpa, Vidradhi, and so on. So these are the three broad categories in which Ayurveda discusses what we understand today as cancer. So from this perspective, and I want to give a unifying framework, what is common in all these cancers? Which is what gives us a distinct advantage and an Ayurvedic insight into how cancer develops. In fact, if you look at it from the Ayurvedic perspective, leading a healthy life with a good lifestyle and diet, and also psychological well-being, it's possible to actually eliminate the possibility of even getting cancer from an Ayurvedic perspective. Cancer is not a fundamental, it's not a disease that we should be getting at all. And I want to highlight that cancer, I think, is also, even though it's an ancient disease, we know that in the papyrus medical documents of the Egyptian medical system, we do find the first documentation of conditions like breast cancer. In Ayurveda, in Greek medicine, it has been described. But if you look at Ayurveda also, it is not even listed as a Mahavyadhi or a major disease of those times. In fact, cancer becoming such a scary disease and becoming such a major factor for human mortality and morbidity, I think, is much more modern. Because today we know amongst the three leading causes of death after cardiovascular disease, we have cancer. And in spite of the fact that cancer treatment is improving in the developed countries, like I looked at some statistics, if you get cancer in India, the chances of survival, the chances of detection also at early stage is very bad. Whereas in the United States, chances of survival is much higher. But the problem is that the incidence of cancer is increasing in spite of these developments in cancer management, early detection. And at one stage, countries like in India, we had much lesser incidence of cancer, although cancer burden in terms of number was much higher because of our population. The incidence of cancer actually was less, and people were even attributing it to some of the dietary components in the Indian traditional diet, like turmeric, which could have prevented the development of cancer and susceptibility to cancer. And I also want to highlight an important observation that in many societies where gerontologists have found that people live long, there is a book of Healthy at 100, in which pockets of human societies, there's one place, Hunza Valley near Pakistan and India, and in Japan, and in Italy, in South America, that people, gerontologists have discovered populations that, have collective longevity and health span and absence of diseases of civilization. Like they don't have cardiovascular disease, they don't have cancer. And they're healthy at, 70 plus, 80 plus, they live long into their 90s. And this clearly indicates that diseases like cancer are diseases of civilization. They are diseases of wrong living, of wrong eating, and, wrong mindset. This is what Ayurveda points out, that cancer is not something which is very easy to develop in the human body unless we are really vulnerable and susceptible. And that's the description of cancer in Ayurveda, that it's an outcome, a later outcome of many pathological processes that we allow to develop in our body. And I will come to that in a short while, what that is. Now, there are very interesting concepts when you just look at it from the Tridosha concept of view. From Ayurvedic point of view, cancer is triggered by Vata, which it is that which causes multiplication or vibhaga. So this is very, very important to understand that and why cancer develops, why one cell has this tendency to divide. This is according to Ayurveda, Vata, but the substratum of cancer is Kapha, because only when there is derangement of Kapha, Vata can trigger the process of carcinogenesis. So according to Ayurveda, cancer in its earlier stages of development is Vata Kapha dominant, which is why it is very silent. This is clearly described that cancer can evade detection for years because of this feature, because of the coming together of Vata and Kapha. And we look at the Shatkriya Kala and the Samprapti of cancer in a short while to understand why cancer Samprapti is so unique. And this is the reason, because in young children, Kapha is in its normal state and strongest. And today also epidemiologically, childhood cancers are considered rare. It's not that they are totally absent, but childhood cancers on the whole, there are very specific types of cancers the children can get in childhood, but compared to adulthood, the risk of cancer increases according to age. And that especially as you age further and further, it is in the Vata Kala of your age that you are most susceptible to cancer. And that makes a lot of sense from the Ayurvedic point of view, because as you age, Vata begins to get dominant. And the more Vata begins to get dominant, the more you are susceptible to cancer. And so from an Ayurvedic perspective, one of the fundamental interventions in preventing cancer is to keep your Vata in balance. And from Ayurvedic perspective, we are aging much faster today. All this bad lifestyle, diet, what we are failing to achieve is the control of Vata in our system. Our organs are aging much faster than they should. And so we are beginning to get susceptible to cancer at much earlier and earlier ages. So aging is a high risk for development of cancer, even according to modern science. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, this is because of the increase of Vata and also the declining and weakening of Kapha. Because we know as we age, two things happen. Vata increases and Kapha loses its stability. And all cancers begin through the cooperation of Vata and Kapha. And this makes old people more susceptible to cancer. But we also know that aggressive cancer, certain cancers like breast cancer, are reported to be more aggressive in young adults, in which age Pitta is more dominant. And this is the most important point. I want to introduce this idea that cancer is tridoshic, and that in solid tumors, it is Vata and Kapha that causes the cellular proliferation and the formation of the bulk of the tumor. But it is when Pitta comes into the picture that the tumor actually becomes aggressive. Till that point of time, it is very silent. And it is when Pitta begins to manifest that the tumor becomes aggressive, metastasis occurs, and then it spreads, and then the destruction of the body happens. So a cancer develops as a Vata Kapha dominant pathological process, which at a certain point brings the manifestation of Pitta. And in Ayurveda, we say that the key thing in preventing cancer from becoming, life-threatening is to keep Pitta under control. So when you control Vata, you can prevent the occurrence of cancer. But if you want to prevent cancer from becoming life-threatening or dangerous, then it is Pitta that we have to be careful about. And this is why sometimes from an Ayurvedic perspective, a surgical intervention or chemotherapy or radiation, which actually provokes Pitta, later makes the cancer very, very aggressive. So some of the modern treatments that we do to deal with cancer, like chemotherapy or radiation, actually provokes Pitta. And then you can see there are studies which show that breast cancer patients, chemotherapy is actually killing and making the cancer more violent. There are references, I can share some at the end of the discussion, how many of these aggressive treatments can actually make the cancer more dangerous. And on the other hand, if you can keep the Pitta under check, you can live with cancer, which is also one of the strategies. The cancer can be still not aggressive. And when in Chinese system, they have done this integrative oncology approaches, where using Chinese system, they have tried to tame the aggression of the cancer, even if they are not able to completely resolve it. And if the cancer doesn't become aggressive, people can still have a long and extended lifespan. And this is this is very, very fundamental conceptual understanding in Ayurveda about cancer. One is preventing, yeah, yes, Vijay. You're not audible.
Ram, sorry to interrupt the flow, but I think, there has been some very important things that you mentioned, which may need further clarification or
Right.
explanation. One of it is really when you spoke about, the involvement of Vayu and Karma, when you were describing the multiplication of Paramanu. Can you explain a little bit more about the karma aspect, as there is also a question by Maura who is asking, what is your view of stress in developing cancer? Because, amongst many who actually know our friends, family, and also our patient population, many actually follow a very good diet, very good lifestyle. They seem to have very harmonious relationships, children, dogs, good holidays, and yet suddenly are diagnosed with stage 3 stage of cancer. So we are always intrigued. How do we understand the impact of stress? And can you look at, what you said about Vayu and Karma? Would you be able to give us some insights into it,
Right,
please?
because stress actually activates our sympathetic nervous system. And if you look at all the data and findings of how the autonomous regulation is affected in stress, there is a sympathetic override, as we say, and the resultant outcome is very similar to Vata Vaigunya. Your heart rate becomes faster, your body goes into a fight or flight response, there's more adrenaline being pumped, the body gets into a stressed state. There is also activation of inflammation, in prolonged chronic stress. While acute stress is, part of our defense mechanism, and it's very essential for our survival, it's chronic stress that is actually a problem. And chronic stress, according to Ayurveda, really disturbs Vata. Kama, Shoga, Bhayad, Vayu. It is Vata that gets disturbed. And this imbalance of Vata can, and I'll come to this concept, which I am talking about, the fear and retaliation of the Jiva Paramanu as a topic, which is actually related to the stress in the internal microenvironment of every cell of our body. When the body is continuously stressed, that is when cancer is triggered. And this stress is translated at the physical level as the stress of the Vata dosha.
Okay. Just a question. Would you say that, this excessive focus on having a perfect diet, perfect lifestyle, very regulated physical activity, 6 sessions of yoga, 9 sessions of meditation, would this also, would these things also cause stress, Ram? Because when I think about my parents, they have a very regular routine, but they don't have these logging everything and focusing on these many sessions of this and that.
Yeah, that is actually, any obsession is harmful. Any obsession is harmful. Even being good, if you're obsessed about being good, it's harmful. So the fundamental thing in Ayurveda is being relaxed and attentive at the same time. How to attention stand at ease. This is what Ashtanga Hridaya tells in the beginning. Be relaxed inside, but still attentive. This is what our ancient training was all about. Being spontaneous, being deeply relaxed inside, and yet, attentive on the outside. But the problem is, in today's world, we have a very rigid understanding of what discipline means, because in Ayurveda, it's responding to nature. And it's not just structuring yourself into a schedule. It's being sensitive to what happens outside and responding naturally and spontaneously. And your life, moment by moment, is different. I mean, you cannot just fix it into a routine. And that's what Dinacharya and Ritucharya is telling you, how things change around you. And in Ayurveda, this is called as Samyak Yoga. Samyak Yoga means how you strike a balance within and without. In any given situation, you must, create an interaction that is balancing within and outside. And this is something which we fail if we think that we have to wake up every day at 6 a.m. no matter what happens. And then you are sometimes creating an asamyak yoga because you are not in balance with things around you. And this is the key thing. Things, when you are in a sattvic state, like suppose the real relaxation comes when you have what is called as krita krityata, when you have done what needs to be done according to the demands of a situation. And that is where the concept of karma also comes. When you have responded correctly to the demands of a situation, then you are leading the right life. And it's very difficult. And also according to your prakriti, a vata person may need a different schedule. And I think today that is the biggest problem. We have generalized ideas about what is healthy living, and people are trying to force fit themselves into these kind of patterns and diets. In Ayurveda, there is nothing which is good or bad. Depending on where you are, even the food items, what is good for you one day in the morning may not be good in the evening. So I think this concept needs to be brought in, and a very deep relaxation inside, which we call as shanti, or prasannata of the mind, which is included in the definition of health. This is ultimately the basis, the elimination of all the ragadis from our mind. So that's the only way you can achieve this state of health. So I don't think today we can see people who are very much focused on gym and routines. We had a few tragedies in India recently. People who were really so physically active, so obsessed with their physical appearance, and who seem to be in the best of their health from medical parameters. I mean, they died sudden, tragic deaths. So we do see that. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think that really gives us, particularly as Ayurvedic practitioners, as you said, krita krityata, doing what needs to be done, to be responsive to the environment rather than sticking to a schedule of good habits alone. Is not what we understand as samyak yoga, which is excellent. One more question, Ram, which I think is important while you are explaining the involvement of doshas, particularly the influence of kapha and vata. This is by Kate. If early cancer is vata kapha dominant, how does reduction in kapha not mean reduction of cancer? Even if vata increases, why does reduction in kapha mean increase in cancer?
It's not reduction in kapha, but it is a quality of kapha that is actually causing cancer. Because Shuddha kapha, it is said, Shuddha kapha is the strength of the body. And this is what we see when we say kapha dushti. There is this phase, which I will come to later, which is called in modern understanding of the development of cancer as metaplasia, or a change in the structure of the cells, the whole configuration of the cells, which we call as kapha dushti. So it is not just decrease in kapha, which is actually a threat for cancer, but the loss of quality of the kapha, which we call as dushti.
And kapha is balasa, the synonym of kapha is balasa, the one.
So right. This is related to also the robustness of your immune system, which weakens as we age, the ability of the body to regenerate, the healthy cells, the stem cell potential of the human body, all that goes down as we age, and that is what makes aging, when we call that as kapha, Kshina kapha in the old age, is not just a decrease in kapha. And there was also a question over exercising. In fact, there are studies which show also that even in terms of the steps that we take, at 7,000, 8,000 steps, the results are optimal, but beyond 10,000 steps, it's counterproductive. And Ayurveda was one of the earliest systems that talked about ati vyayama, the harms of ati vyayama, over exercising. Too much of anything is bad. But on the other hand, I would also like to point out that moderate exercise which includes actually an ideal balance of vigorous workouts, stretching and walking. You need to be moving and you need to be stretching, and then you also need to give some vigorous workout for your cardiovascular system. If you balance these three things, that is what in Ayurveda we would call as Mita Vyayama. And if you do that, it has been found that if you collect the serum of people who are exercising and you try to grow cancer cells, the cancer cells don't survive in the serum of people who are exercising optimally, which means exercise is a very good, this is one of the Pachana mechanisms of Ayurveda also. The Lankhana is Vyayama, and that Vyayama alone is good enough to destroy cancer, to prevent the growth of cancer cells. So not having optimal exercise is certainly a risk for cancer. Whereas over-exercising is definitely harmful. Not only over-exercising, choosing inappropriate exercises, which I think is much more common today, because people just want to have a six-pack abdomen or show off their deltoid muscles, and it's very imbalanced. And in Ayurveda, when you do proper exercise, it's the strength of Vata that is important, that is vital capacity. In Ayurveda, we are not focused on just muscular strength, because we say Hanuman, we have the concept of Hanuman and Bhima. They are not muscle men, they are Vata, people of Vata power. Hanuman is Vayuputra, Bhima is also Vayuputra. So the Vata power comes through the practice of yoga, through the practice of pranayama. And there your lung vital capacity increases much more. And if your vital capacity increases, if your lungs become more efficient, your cardiovascular system also becomes more efficient. And then your muscular system can also be developed. But if you, in the gym, this is the problem. In yoga, you can see deep breathing is always accompanying all yoga practices. And positioning and posturing of the body. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's going a little.
Yes, thank you so much. And at some stage, if you could also clarify what you mean by karma at some stage, okay? But I know there is.
I'll come to that a little later, because I will be discussing.
Carry on with your presentation, Ram. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vijay, for this. So now, if you look at the causative factors, a combination of psychological, lifestyle, and dietary factors, including constitutional and genetic predisposition. This is how Ayurveda would look at the possibility of developing cancer. And if you look psychologically, excessive fear, feelings of insecurity, and that can lead to aggravation of Vata. And today, I think this is one of the biggest challenges. We are living in a very comfortable world, and this has made us very susceptible to even small stresses. We cannot, if a bus doesn't come on time, in that way, I think India is much more better in some sense. We can expect the worst every moment. If I go to the train station, I can be sure that the train will never come on time, and I'm not stressed because I'm used to that. But in a modern technology supported world, we are used to so many comforts and we are pampered. We are not able to handle stress. It's much more than actually the stress. Our ability to respond to the stress has been very greatly affected today. Small things can upset us now. And I think that is the reason. It's not the stress itself, but how we respond to the stress. We are not mentally strong in modern society. And this is the price we have to pay for a lot of these comforts that modern life comes with. So if there's a slightest breakdown of something, we completely get swept off our feet, and we get feelings of insecurity, panic attacks, anxiety. And if this continuously happens, we are a sitting duck, for this dangerous disease that we call cancer. And if you look at the behavior, Mamsa Dhatu, Rakta Dhatu, these are very much involved in the development of Arbudha according to Ayurveda. And lack of exercise, compromised blood circulation. It's very interesting, even angiogenesis, which is a mechanism through which cancer cells propagate themselves. It's very interesting to see this correlation in Ayurveda of Rakta Dhatu involvement. I mean, cancer cells are like vampires. It's a Dracula inside our own body, feeding on our own blood. Cancer cells develop its own network of specialized blood vessels, and it really sucks the blood out of our system. And so Ayurvedic texts say that it is in the mamsa and in the rakta dhatu that cancer develops. And that if you can keep your body fit through optimal exercise, that is the importance of mamsa dhatu also. And also your circulation is optimized with all the unwanted wastes perfectly removed from time to time, for which an active life is very important, then you can reduce the risk of cancer. And this pranic movement, this is also very, very important. And this is where I think yoga has a big role to play in the prevention of cancer. When in Ayurveda, it's not just that blood circulates, it's prana which circulates. And you know, in yoga, what we are trying to do is to bring prana to every nook and corner of your body. And prana is actually permeating in your sukshma shariram. And it is only through breath and through correct posture that you can make sure that prana is moving in every part of your body. And in Ayurveda, even before blood circulation stagnates, pranic circulation stagnates. And after that, you see it physically, as you know, the stagnation of the blood circulation. And all shobha or inflammation has pranic, the lack of pranic movement at its base, which is why I think acupuncture also helps in a lot of these conditions, because in acupuncture, you're stimulating the movement of prana at a more subtle level. The only thing is that the effects are sometimes temporary because you don't correct the underlying imbalance, which may need much more longer term treatment. But I think the Chinese system has developed a wonderful technique here to, in the short term, deal with these prana imbalances, which in the old Indian traditions also more sophisticated marma techniques were there, like in the Siddha system, which are also very similar, but which are now gone into disuse. So when it comes to foods that aggravate vata and pitta and can cause utklesha of kapha, taken over a long period of time. And this is exactly what is happening with modern diets, because today we have two things. One is this explosion of nutritional science, so much so that we get contradictory information. I wouldn't go by nutritional science today to decide what I should take or not, because every day we get some contradictory information. One day they say coffee is good, the next day say it's bad. One day they say tea is good, the next day it's bad, or one type of tea is good, bad. Everything, milk is good, it's bad, it's poison. We have all contradictory things. On the other hand, in modern life, now food choices are controlled by the industry much more than by nutritional science. And today we are very susceptible because we have an information explosion in nutritional science, which the food industry can very well put to their advantage, manipulate it, and completely influence our decisions on making exactly the wrong choices when it comes to diet. And all these foods, especially the use of preservatives and these food additives, and the very fact that stored food, according to Ayurveda, it is tamasic. Yadayamam gatarasam. There is not enough prana in this food. If the food that supplies you is also prana, and food when it is fresh is having a sattvic influence on your mind. Yes, artificial sweeteners, all these minute sukshma substances which the body cannot process is, according to Ayurveda, a carcinogen. It builds up in the body as ama, and it can cause a threat to the jiva paramanu, which is what I'm going to come to in a moment. So all these things can trigger inflammation or shobha, excessive exposure to sun, smoke, pollutants, toxins. And then it's also possible from an Ayurvedic point of view, like diseases like cancer could be adibala pravritta vyadhi, having genetic origins, can be inherited from mother or father. But however, there is no explicit description of cancer or granthi being genetic in its origin. But many later diseases does talk about cancer as an outcome of karma vipaka. Karma vipaka, why we say that is kriyagna karmaja virogaha. Karmaja vyadhis don't give an opportunity for treatment. And whenever a disease defies treatment, we consider, that's one of the definitions, one of the ways in which we can classify a disease as karmaja. One is you discover it at a stage when you cannot treat it anymore. And this is what cancer is notorious for. It is so silent. And we will just look at that description from an Ayurvedic perspective, that the moment it manifests, it's already too late. I mean, it's in the whole architecture of the pathogenesis of cancer that it itself designed to manifest itself as a stage when nothing much can be done. And this is what makes, I think, cancer most dangerous. And their modern technology, like Purushakara, as we would say, the earlier we discover it, the more the chances of recovery. So this is also important to understand. When you say that cancer is created by karma, it does not mean a fatalistic judgment of this disease. It only means that you need more Purushakara or more effort to actually overcome it. So this is also very important to understand. So many people, when they think that cancer is caused by karma, they already go on they think that we are already defeated. I mean, there's nothing we can do. No, karmaja vyadhi means the efforts that we will have to take to even prevent a disease like cancer is very demanding. More effort is needed. That's all. It doesn't really mean that you can never treat it. And I have had some experiences of wonderful results in people who looked at cancer as karma in the positive way. Because this is very, very important, because otherwise cancer can just, if you bring the concept of cancer in the wrong way, you're just going to perpetuate or provoke guilt. And there is nothing more dangerous in a disease like cancer. I mean, it's not going to help anybody just to tell them that this is the result of your karma and now you suffer. I mean, how is that going to help a cancer patient? I remember a French lady who had breast cancer, advanced breast cancer, who came to Kerala and who got treated and who recovered miraculously, prompting her own physician, an oncologist from France, to come all the way to India to do a documentary, which is now available on the web as The Indian Summer or My Indian Doctor. I think it was Brooke, I don't remember exactly, but if you look at the My Indian Doctor or The Indian Summer, you will get this documentary online. And this lady, once we interviewed her and asked her, what do you think? How do you think you survived cancer? She went to an ashram in India and underwent spiritual counseling and also Ayurvedic treatment. And she just said one thing: the disease came to teach me a lesson. And once I learned that lesson, it went away. Now, I found that this is one of the most positive ways in which you can look at karma in the context of cancer. That disease, yes, I will share that link. Just a second. So, yeah, here's the link. I'll just put it in the chat box. So from this patient, I actually, it was also for me a revelation of how you can interpret karma in the context of cancer. So, which means that we need to transform. In order to conquer cancer, we need to help the patient to transform at a deep personal level, at the level of their personality. It's not just destroying, some cancerous cells. And that's why Ayurveda tells it's a manifestation of karma. It's only pointing out where you must look for the solution. By the time cancer develops, it involves your entire being at the physical, mental, psychological, and spiritual levels. So when you say it is a karmic disease, it means if you want to find a solution, you must transform yourself at a very deep level, and then you can effect a cure. That's a positive effect. It's not like it's a verdict that cancer, here's a disease of karma, and now you suffer and you die. That's not how karmic diseases should be interpreted. So I hope that makes sense. And I mean, Yes, Vijay. Yeah, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Ram, for that explanation, because when we think of cancer, particularly where we live in countries which have had long histories of invasion, that disease also is seen as something to be won over or, to conquer. So there's this concept of battle, and that kind of language in our heads also makes us feel that, we cannot actually make friends with it and therefore overcome. And I think, that explanation of karma was excellent. Thank you, because it's not that, you just have no solutions, but it is, as you say, opportunity to actually, reflect and then make friends with it. I think one of the things is, we have so much of, we will beat it. Everywhere there's the messaging, we will beat it, we will win. Almost like disease is an enemy or a battle that we need to, which itself causes a lot of stress on many different levels.
Yes, I mean, it's very dangerous to have a distrust of your body, because you must know that the body, that's why we say vata, vikrita deham, ghrantite vartayantite. The vata itself kills or it preserves. So once we change our own inner configuration, the body begins to heal and become good by itself. So disease is something which we create. I mean, it's in that way, it's not an enemy, it's a friend that helps us to, that's pointing to us a path of self-transformation and self-correction. And that's exactly what the theory of karma points out. Okay, so, so in Ayurveda, yeah, I think time is passing much faster, and I'll see some of the key concepts I'll try to cover. And as I anticipated, it will not be possible to cover all the slides that I have prepared. But if you're all interested to read further, I can share the full slides anyway, because they will have additional material that could be read. So you can consider them as additional reading material. And also some links I will share at the end where you can do more reading. Yes. Okay. Yes. Every disease, even jwara or fever in Ayurveda is, a curse, the body's own curse to awaken us. All curse is a blessing in disguise in our tradition. So you can see all these great sages, and they all had this habit of cursing. And we always used to think what bad people they are. But they curse so that they can protect. So the curse is actually a blessing. And without that curse, we would have gone into, so we say just like a thorn, you step on a thorn and then you avoid a snake because you became more alert. That's the way we look at all bad experiences in our tradition. There is nothing really bad. So what is bad is only, an indicator or a signal that we are wrong and that we need to find out the right path. Yes. So now in cancer, I'm going to get into a little bit more granularity of how the doshas work here. Arbuda is caused by what Ayurveda calls as dosha samurchana. In any part of the body, it can happen, especially with involvement of mamsa and rakta, leading to formation of hard, painless, huge lumps. Vrittam, they are very circular. Sthiram, very hard. Mandarujam, they are initially not painful. This has been very clearly clinically checked. And Mahantam means they are usually much more than it appears on the outside. When you start exploring, you will find, it's quite spread. It's very deep inside. Analpamulam, it's deep rooted. It's very fixed. This is very clearly indicated. Our ancient Ayurveda clinicians used to check the fixedness of the lump and decide whether it's cancerous or not. If it was fixed and not moving, then achalyam, it was considered to be dangerous. Chira Vriddhi growing very slowly, and usually not in the early stages, it doesn't suppurate. So this is one way in which we distinguished, the other abscesses or boils or other growths, which would soon suppurate and bring pus. But if you see a lump that for a long time is not suppurating and which just remains as it is, then you have to be suspicious. And Atyagatham, this has a tendency to penetrate very deep. So a very beautiful clinical description of solid tumors is very clearly seen in the classical Ayurvedic text. And now here I want to point out in Ayurveda, how does cancer develop? And this is the key thing. I'm sure all of you have heard about AMA, and I want to just give a classification of AMA here very quickly. AMA is something which the body cannot digest, but cannot either assimilate, not eliminate. That's what we call as AMA. So AMA is not indigestion. Indigestion is delayed digestion. AMA is failed digestion. Because once you digest something, you know what the body should take and what should be removed. That discrimination is what we call as digestion. So at any stage of digestion or metabolism, if this whole process of transformation stops, that is what we call as AMA. In fact, the word Sanskrit means that which stops moving or stops transforming. That is the meaning of the word AMA. AMA gatau and nagat gati, or that which does not move or transform anymore. That's what we call as AMA. So it's completely failed transformation. So now the body doesn't know what to do with this. The AMA has this nature of being partly Sara and partly Kitta, means partly waste and partly something which the body can recognize as its own. So AMA is really an identity crisis. The AMA in the body creates the identity crisis of the self and the non-self, because digestion is actually to Satmyam, as we call it. I know what is mine, what is not the self is eliminated as waste, and in AMA we are not able to distinguish between the self and the non-self. And at a very gross level, this is what causes the autoimmune reaction, which is also increasingly prevalent nowadays, also because of the modern lifestyle and habit, which allows the development of AMA in the system, because we are not allowing digestion and metabolism to reach its natural conclusion due to our erratic ways. So autoimmune diseases are on the rise. This is when the immune system gets a trigger or an alert and tries to do the pachana of that AMA. And that AMA body is not able to distinguish what is the self and the non-self, because there is a stage where this AMA gets accumulated inside the dhatus, and that state of AMA is called Leena AMA. This is the most dangerous way. I'm not going to all the classifications because we don't have time for that, but that's also very interesting clinically. But Leena AMA is the most dangerous, because when AMA is there in the system, the body usually tries to throw it out or it tries to burn it away. So you get disease quickly, immediately. If that doesn't happen, this AMA accumulates, it goes into the dhatus and remains there. And this condition is what we call as Leena AMA. And when you have Leena AMA in the system, you develop disease silently. And two of the biggest killers in modern life, cardiovascular disease and cancer, they are both caused by Leena AMA. And they are silent till they reach that tipping point where they manifest. And Leena AMA causes disease when they become manifest. It doesn't give us a time to do an intervention. You're already dead. That is the biggest danger of Leena AMA. Leena AMA happens because of lack of periodical shodhana. If we do not follow Dinacharya and Ritucharya, then we are building up Leena AMA in our body. Because every day our body eliminates the waste. Season by season, we have to eliminate the waste. So Ayurveda tells us that we have to do the shodhana according to the seasons. We have to make sure the moment we wake up in the body removes. So every lifestyle advice in Ayurveda is to prevent accumulation of ama in the body. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it would be very interesting to discuss about the ama classification. We'll see. I would be very happy to do that some other day. But today we will digress if we go too much into ama. I'm just talking about the Leena ama, which is very specific for cancer. And this is why I think from an Ayurvedic point of view, if you introduce Dinacharya, Ritucharya and Panchakarma and Rasayana as a preventive measure, I feel quite convinced out of my 30 years of experience in this field that cancer incidence will plummet down, and this will reduce the load, the healthcare burden of societies worldwide. Yes, Vijay.
So Ram, would it be okay, like that's why in Charaka, when it comes to Kshaya or the disease of, total depletion, that even Mala becomes the bala to just keep the person surviving, in the sense when the body is unable to really process, ama itself is a way of protecting the body from really going into further deterioration, and hence what the body does not eliminate on a regular basis, it just keeps accumulating without disturbing it. And therefore the daily routine and seasonal routines, shodhana from time to time would be essential.
It's true, but I like to make a little distinction between mala and ama, because mala is something which the body has recognized as waste and labeled it. Now the body knows how to handle it. So mala can even support the body, but not ama, because ama is something which the body does not understand, which it has not processed. So the body is not able to predict or deal with ama. And although the ama can remain silent, it can suddenly trigger, like it can provoke your immune system, or it can provoke cellular mutations, that happens in cancer. Because ama that goes deep into the dhatu is what provokes that dhatu to become cancerous. So from my understanding, cancer is a dhatu with Leena ama inside. And so it shows half character of the cell and half character as ama. So it is a conflict of the self and the non-self, which you see in the development of cancer. So ama is very, very critical. And unless ama remains in the body for a long, long time, I'm sorry, I was just responding to a message. Yes. So that's the thing here, that for cancer to develop, you must have accumulated ama at the dhatu level in the Leena condition. And there is also one more thing, that, this ama, which is Ushna Ruksha in nature, is very specific for cancer, because it has properties opposite to that of Ojas. If you look at all the carcinogens which modern science describes as capable of bringing about a genetic mutation and the development of cancer, all these carcinogens from Ayurvedic point of view have Ushna Ruksha Guna. Even if it is nicotine or cigarette smoke or any irritant, that they all have Ushna Ruksha Guna. Ushna Ruksha is opposite to Ojas. So when a cell is continuously being threatened in an Ushna Ruksha environment, that cell feels insecure. This is the beginning of cancer. So if you allow an insecure cellular environment to develop inside, by the accumulation of the Sukshma ama, the Ushna Ruksha Guna. So even in Ayurveda, we say even salt, alkalis, chara, you should not use regularly because they have too much of Ushna Ruksha Guna. It is to be avoided. And if you look at all modern these preservatives or processed food, they are all surviving on this Ushna Ruksha Guna, which, these chemicals, which additives, which we are adding to food, the environmental toxins that we are continuously getting exposed to, all of them have this characteristic of Ushna Ruksha Guna and the ability to become leaner or, deep entrained in the cellular environment of the dhatus. So what we are seeing here is that this Ushna Ruksha Guna is threatening the dhatu. And as the Shita Snigdha Guna, which is the ojas of that dhatu, is getting continuously threatened, the cell begins to feel, I'm putting it very figuratively here, there is a sense of insecurity in that cell. So the cell feels frightened. And Ekoham Bahusyam, this is there in the Upanishads. When you feel very lonely, you want to become many so that you feel more secure. And hyperplasia, or accelerated cell division, is nothing but this provocation of vata. Vata is the fear, because bhaya is a manifestation of vata. So if you threaten any of your cellular components with Ushna Ruksha Guna continuously, they will all get this vata provocation. And they will go into a hyperplastic state, which means they start dividing. Because when they divide, they feel more secure. It's very simple. The vata multiplication is just like when you are alone, you feel scared, and when you have more people around you, you feel more secure. So the cancer cell in the beginning, according to Ayurveda, is very, very vulnerable. It is actually and there is a big metamorphosis that happens before cancer takes on that demonic nature. It's not at all like that in the beginning. It is like a frightened child. Your cell in the earliest stages of cancer development is very vulnerable, very frightened, very cornered, very insecure. And this is the best stage to treat cancer according to Ayurveda. Even before, the cell undergoes the later stages. And that is why Dinacharya, Ridhucharya, Rasayana, which makes sure that, this transformation, even hyperplasia, many times you see precancerous states are just hyperplastic because the cells are still normal. They're just a bit frightened. But then what happens is metaplasia. As the cells begin to grow in numbers, they begin to get more confidence. And the tipping point is when the cancer cells realize that we are more powerful now than the rest of the body. And that is, until that stage, the cancer remains silent. So this is the whole process of this Vatic fear that stimulates the development of cancer, which is why, according to Ayurveda, even deep fear, unresolved deep fear in your mind can trigger cancer in your body. Because if that fear is so deep that it disturbs your intracellular environment, because as we know, fear can produce all these harmful stress hormones and chemicals, and that can again, put the cells under stress and provoke this hyperplastic development. And today modern science does not know how and when this happens, because any cell at any point of time can mutate and become cancerous. And this is happening in our life, but we all don't develop cancer because our body's immune system recognizes and destroys it. So this cellular fear, the fear of the Paramanu, and how the body deals with this is happening continuously. But when that fear builds up and there is no compensation for that fear, that is when the seed of cancer is sown. And that is why I titled our presentation today as the fear and retaliation of the Jiva Paramanu. That is how Ayurveda understands cancer. So if you do not do things that support ojas in your system, so even mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, anything exhaustive that takes you to the brink of a sudden decrease in ojas, that can make you susceptible to cancer according to Ayurveda. So preservation of ojas, the mind is the most crucial thing. A mental stress, ojas the kopakshu dhyana shoga sramadibhi, ojas just burns away in no moment. Ojas that you have built over years can be burnt in just one moment of stress according to Ayurveda. Yes, trauma, see, as long as it affects trauma according to Ayurveda, it causes problems when it affects your prana. if it doesn't go deep into the prana, then you can come out of that shock, especially this PTSD and all that. The shock that impacts you at your pranic being, at your pranic level, is something which will not be resolved unless you work on your pranamaya kosha. And most of the time today, trauma management is very physical. I mean, you don't, what you say, mental comforting is not enough, because your prana sharira has been affected. And unless you deal with that individual at the level of prana, that pranic imbalance will keep bringing back those, the trauma out of your system. And when prana is affected, circulation, all these things are affected. Yes, the more the ama is deep rooted in the dhatu, the more the chances of getting cancer. The more the ama is outside the dhatu, where the body's immune system is having a better chance of recognizing it, the more it will trigger an autoimmune response. So chronic lack of shodhana. Another thing is koshta shakha gadi, where your body has lost that ability to throw out unwanted wastes. Everything is accumulating. Then the chances of getting cancer is more. So lack of sleep, especially the typical modern life, where the body is not in an excreting or eliminating mode. It is more in an intake mode. Everything, drinking cola, eating food while you're working. Even when you're sleeping, you have a snack box near you. The body is losing that ability to eliminate unwanted things. It is, accumulating. And this can lay the foundation for cancer.
Ram, maybe it would be helpful, if you could explain the Koshtagati, Shakagati, and the Marmasti Sandhigati, or Madhyama Marga of the doshas, please.
Yes, because, in our body, there is a continuous movement of nutritional substances and wastes from the alimentary tract to the tissues and to the protected organs. So the koshta is what we call as the alimentary tract, where we connect to the external environment. All the food that we eat gets into our alimentary tract, and there we distinguish what the body needs and what it does not need. So all the gross wastes are removed from the colon itself. And then the first digested essence goes into the circulation. And this circulation is called as the shakha. As it moves in the circulation, this digested essence undergoes further metabolic transformation and further separation and, nutritious substances. And then it goes to the third level, the protected organs, like the heart, the brain, crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is called as the madhyama, or the central pathway, which is the most protected. All the vital organs are in the central pathway. And the broader peripheral circulation is the shakha. And then we have, so this is how Ayurveda considers the human body. And it's very essential that the movement is bidirectional. That is, nutrition moves inside and wastes and unwanted substances moves outside. And in many diseases, our body goes into this movement becomes more dominant in one direction, especially in the internal direction. And that is the foundation for many diseases, because the body now is more in an intake mode rather than an elimination mode. So this is what we call as Koshta Shakha and Shakha Koshtagati. And in fact, as the first step in the treatment of management, what we do to a patient is also to bring back the balance of this bidirectional movement. By giving preliminary Pachana, Shodhana treatments, we are resetting this whole mechanism so that the body's ability to eliminate is restored. Because Ayurveda believes that all we need to do is to support the intelligence of the body, and then the body will take care of the disease. We are not directly trying to cure the disease, but reset and correct all those inbuilt mechanisms which the body can use to, self-correct itself. So in cancer is a karmic disease also because we violate all these processes. We are making the impossible happen. Because in a healthy body, it's almost impossible for cancer to happen. The body is designed to prevent such a catastrophe. And simple societies, and in fact, yes, as Vijay pointed out, all these societies where gerontologists did this study, they found, of course, diet and lifestyle played an important part, but the most important factor that helped them to get healthy lives was they had no stress, mental stress. They led a very simple, carefree life. They were not burdened by the stress of, achieving unrealistic targets or having these blown up sense of needs and wants and luxuries. So their simple life also helped them to avoid, the triggering of diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease. Okay. So now, what happens in Ayurveda for cancer is that when this Ushna Ruksha type of Sukshma Ama is threatening a Jiva Paramanu or a cell at the Dhatu level continuously, that Dhatu retaliates. It is afraid, and if we can give that assurance by a simple cleansing procedure or a rasayana treatment, the cell will get assured, and the whole process will subside. I mean that vata disturbance will subside. So in Ayurveda, we say on a day-by-day basis, we must specify vata. At the end of the day, vata gets aggravated. And that is why sleep is one of the best ways to restore vata. If you don't get deep sleep, lack of sleep is a big risk for cancer. There are chemicals that the body produces, especially when you go into deep sleep, at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, deep sleep, the body produces a lot of chemicals that help in destroying cancer cells. So sleep deprivation can make you more susceptible to cancer. So this is well studied and understood now, just like lack of exercise. So the upastambhas of Ayurveda, Ahara, Nidra, and Brahmacharya. Brahmacharya, I consider that as a stress-free life, not as celibacy. Because sometimes having normal sex is also very relaxing and, considered spiritual in Ayurveda. As long as your goal of Brahman is not, that is your goal, then Brahmacharyam, we have Vaivahika Brahmacharyam and also Naishtika Brahmacharyam. Brahmacharya means following the path of Brahman, being your mind in an expanded state. When you are following Dharma and there is no conflict in your mind, then you are in Brahmacharya. And that's the best way. Then have a simple diet of, sattvic food. Even non-vegetarian food can be sattvic if it is prepared in the right way according to Ayurveda. In a gentle way through yajna, there is a procedure also. And then sleep. These three things, very fundamental even for cancer prevention. It looks so simple, but it's a fact. Yes, if you have insomnia, you have to work on it. Surely, yes. Because insomnia, yes, I will come to that soon. So we are already delayed, but I think there are a few more things that I will need to discuss before we conclude. So I was just informed that we could take a little bit more time if it's okay.
Yeah, okay, Ram, yeah.
So in Ayurveda, cancer is classified on the basis of predominant dosha or on the basis of dhatu involved. So we have Vata Arbuda, Pitta Arbuda, or Rakta Arbuda, Mamsa Arbuda. So just like in modern science, they would classify on the basis of the histopathological appearance. In Ayurveda, it is based on the dosha dushyas involved, because that helps us to decide what medicine we must choose, against a particular type of cancer. Now, what I want to talk about is how this cancer develops from the Ayurvedic perspective. And before that, there is one more classification which I would like to show here. Is in Ayurveda, Granthi and Arbuda is a manifestation of what we call a Shobha. Shobha is just inflammation. So inflammation by itself does not need to develop into cancer, but certain types of inflammation, especially when they become chronic, they have a tendency to develop into Granthi and Arbuda. Now our question is, when you have inflammation, or Ama, that is Lina, how do we know whether we are going to develop autoimmune disease or whether it will develop into cancer? For that, we need to quickly go through the Shat Kriya Kalas, and then I will conclude our discussion today. even though there's still a lot to cover. I think concepts, I mean, brief webinars like this, the purpose would be also to show the scope of the topic. I mean, it's unrealistic to expect to cover everything, but it's a good first step to know that Ayurveda has got quite a rich, spectrum of information to offer, and that should probably get us interested in probing more. I mean, that's all I would be able to do today. And then, this is also known in modern medicine, how this change happens. In the first stage, we can see the cellular changes, which in Ayurveda would be samadhatu, and then metaplasia would be vishamadhatu. So that critical point is when samadhatu becomes vishamadhatu by the activation of vata. So in the first stage, if you see that the cellular structure has not changed, so in the airways, it's still pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium, but there is hyperplasia, which means it's multiplying faster than it should, but it's not differentiated. It's still the same old cell. Then it's not cancer, it's hyperplasia. And in this stage, if we are able to detect, it's very easy, even from our Ayurvedic point of view, you can quickly stabilize vata there. Simple vata hara treatment is enough at this stage to stop the cancer. But the problem is we don't detect it. How do we detect this? If you must anticipate aprasannendriyam vikshya purusham kushalo bhishak. If a person has even, this underlying stress, if its pranic body is affected, the Vaidya should anticipate such a problem and already treat that. In those days, they did not have the technology to look at hyperplasia, but they inferred this through the study of prana by the nadi examination and other things. If they found that the stress is there at the deep level, then that is why Sushruta says, even if an individual has an aprasannendriyatu, it is enough reason to treat them. That vata imbalance should be treated at that point itself so that it doesn't perpetuate. Today, we have just the opposite. You go to a doctor and you do a checkup and you find that all your parameters are normal, and they say it's your psychological problem. And that exactly is that problem which is going to put you in trouble, which modern medicine needs a biomedical. It detects disease only when the samprapti has advanced enough to show some biochemical changes, some changes in the biochemical markers. And Ayurveda points out that we must detect cancer much, much early, even when there are no tumor markers, when there are no biochemical changes. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to quickly go through the samprapti, and then we will conclude. This would give us only an understanding of how Ayurveda looks at cancer, but that would be very foundational, and then we'll have to leave it here today at that point. So let me just go further. So sanchaya. So ama accumulates in the dhatus and becomes lina. This is the sanchaya stage. Chronic inflammation is triggered, and there are hardly any specific symptoms manifesting at this stage. There may be some signs of dosha imbalance or lina ama. There could be some psychological stress. And this is why in Ayurveda, we need to come out with measures, where we can detect imbalance at this stage, where a modern doctor would say, go back, you have no problem, your blood tests are normal. This is a stage where we should treat. If we start treating through Ayurveda wellness programs in these stages, I think a lot of cancers could be prevented. So Agni is impaired. So these are all parameters which good Ayurveda physician can, assess. And maybe if we do some tests to look at hyperplasia and such changes, we might be able to detect them also. Maybe some new scanners and things which we discover in the future could do a quick scanning like PET scan, which today, of course, can detect cancer only in the metastatic stage. But if we are able to detect some signals or changes in how cells behave, I think in the Sanchaya stage, in those days, they used Nadi and other mechanisms, but today maybe we can use technology. This is an integrative area where we could think in the future, where Ayurvedic concepts and modern technology could be brought together. So this is the stage where the hyperplasia develops, where vata is disturbed. The cell is in a fear and it wants to multiply so that it feels secure. There is still no disease. And sometimes our hyperplasia can subside by itself. It may not even develop cancer. And you can see this in prostate cancer, which is well known for slow development. It takes a long time for it to, so even when we detect hyperplasia so there is also benign prostate hypertrophy, which, remains for a long time. And in some people, it can develop into malignancy. There are some cancers which remain in the Sanchaya stage for a long time. Somewhere we cannot see it, somewhere we can also notice it, like prostate. Then is the Prakopa, where the Jivanu Vibhaga is happening from an Ayurvedic perspective. The disease continues to be silent, but in this stage, there is dysplasia or Dhatu Dushti. That means this is why we call this as Prakopa. Now, the cell is not normal anymore. You can see that cell differentiation is there. If we go back to our older slide, we can see here that now there is a metaplasia. That is pseudostratified columnar epithelium has now become squamous epithelium. It's not the normal cell. So in urinary bladder, transitional epithelium now becomes squamous epithelium. And again in esophagus, squamous epithelium becomes columnar epithelium. So this cellular changes is what I think in Ayurveda we are calling as Prakopa, which in modern science they're understanding as metaplasia and dysplasia. And at the end of this stage, there is an active neoplasm, which is a cancerous tumor growing in that location. And the tumor might remain in this stage for a long period of time. The problem with cancer is that the Prasara stage, this cancer remains in the Prakopa stage for a long, long time before Prasara happens. So in modern classification of tumor, like the TNM classification, the tumor node metastasis classification, is actually very similar to the Shatkriya Kala classification. So when you say tumor, it's that it is in the Sanchaya or Prakopa stage. In the Prasara stage, it is N, Tn, N1. If it is N0, then T1, N0 is Prakopa stage. T1, N1 is Prasara stage. And T1, N1, M1 is Sthana Samshraya stage. So, the TNM classification is just a modern way of explaining the Shatkriya Kala from an Ayurvedic point of view. So after Prakopa, we have Prasara. In this stage, the tumor begins to get aggressive. And this is where the lymph nodes are, involved in Prasara stage. It's only the lymph nodes. Still, the disease is subclinical. We see this in many breast cancers. So now in our clinic, we are using the Shatkriya Kala classification. Instead of TNM, we would like to put it as S, Prakopa, Prasara, which stage the patient has come to us. So if the lymph nodes are involved, we consider it at a Prasara stage. So now the metastasis has not yet occurred. And next stage is Sthana Samshraya, which is established metastasis. And even in this stage, the disease can be silent, which is the most frightening part of cancer. And we are seeing that in our clinics every day, that many patients come to us already in a metastasized stage, and they are still subclinical. And it is when it becomes the Vyakti and Bheda, that is when this change of the cancer patient, I think, is the most mentally distressing experience for a sensitive oncologist. That the patient walks in at the time of diagnosis almost well, even though we are shocked by seeing all the images, PET scans and all that, but the patient is still well and moving around. And then in the next few months, the deterioration happens, which is the last two stages of Vyakti and Bheda. After the metastasis, this is the stage where, according to Ayurveda, Pitta completely manifests. And now the disease becomes clinically full blown. And this is the uniqueness of cancer, that it becomes clinically identifiable only in the Vyakti stage. And that is what we say karma. If you want to identify it earlier, it is a karmaja vyadi. You need extra effort and vigilance. And with extra effort and vigilance, according to Ayurveda, we can identify cancer at the stage of Sanchaya itself. And Bheda is that final terminal stage of cancer where we can only give palliative care. So I think we have to stop here. Because without completing the Shatkariya Kala, it would have been very incomplete. But now I hope we got an understanding of the pathogenesis or the progression of cancer from the Ayurvedic perspective. And it offers us a lot of theoretical frameworks on how to think about not only its early prevention, but management across all the stages. And we have a very clear Tridoshik and Saptadhatu understanding in the framework of AMA. And I think if we build upon this, which is a topic for another discussion, we can get very good frameworks for cancer management from the Ayurvedic perspective. Namaste and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ram Manohar. And, it's almost like listening to a rishi. So like you're like the modern rishi, and really unpicking the most critical interpretations of Ayurveda in a way that all of us can understand. So thank you very much. Of course, there were a few questions which I'm guessing may be too late to take up, but one about, what could intermittent fasting be causing stress? What's your take on artificial sweetness? I think in many ways you have answered them, because from an Ayurvedic perspective, it's about maintaining the Soma Guna of the Ojas. Snigdha Mashniyat, Ushna Mashniyat, and then from what you have said, it's the Snigdha Mashniyat part has been missing in our everyday lifestyle. We definitely have had very good feedback that doesn't surprise me at all. So APA...
Just one word about intermittent fasting. Fasting is good. And the thing is, as long as you don't disturb Vata, fasting is okay. But sometimes we take it to the extreme, because the problem with Vata is that the moment it disturbs Vata, it is harmful. So if you can fast without disturbing Vata, then there won't be a problem.
Yeah. And APA would definitely like to welcome you back, should you agree, in early spring, as oncology is such a huge topic. But today what you have done, Dr. Ram, is that you have given us insights into the importance of Ama, Vata, and Karma. I think if we can look at this whole topic from the aspects of Vayu, Ama, and Karma. But finally, I'd like to ask you if you could give us one relevant translation for Ama, because often it's translated inadequately as endotoxins and undigested material, or as toxins. But surely, if there's anybody who could come up with a term that would fairly represent this very intriguing concept of Ama, maybe Ram, you could do that. Would you give us a term?
I was muted, sorry. Yeah, it's very difficult actually to find the exact term. But if you look at the meaning of the word Ama, these are all, improperly, inadequately processed byproducts of digestion and metabolism, which the body can neither assimilate or eliminate. And so it's a long definition that I have. I'm afraid there is no single term in modern science also, which your body cannot assimilate or remove, and which has the potential to also interfere with the normal physiological processes of the body. And I wouldn't call this as toxin, because toxin in Ayurveda is Visha. There is a totally another concept. Ama has never been, when Ama becomes toxic, we call it as Ama Visha specifically. So this idea of detoxification, and Panchakarma is not detoxification, it is Shodhana, it is bio-cleansing. detoxification is agada, where you are really dealing with toxins. So I think this idea of mentioning ama as toxin is little going overboard and over interpreting that terminology. This is more related to metabolic and digestive aberrations, which we are to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, it would mean that we are poisoning ourselves every day. The interesting thing with ama is that ama is so close to us and yet so far. It's coming out of our own food, something which we should have made our own. We are not able to assimilate. That is the dilemma of the ama. So I know I'm not being very helpful in giving a single term, but I have to accept that as a challenge. Maybe in future, we will get to an appropriate term.
Yeah. No, that's very insightful. Thank you very much, Ram, for taking your time out. And thank you, everybody who have attended. And the recording will be available for those who have not been able to be with us this morning. I'm sure, I will listen to the recording again. And Sue, would you like to make the concluding remarks as the president of the APA?
Yeah, thank you very, very much. The comments we're having coming back, I know you can see the chat box, but everybody is just saying wonderful, so interesting, amazing. Can you come back again? Can you explain this and that? So yeah, I think you're very well loved, and we really are very grateful that you've given up your time for the APA this morning. And we've got wonderful feedback. You can see that everybody is really wanting to learn from you. And I would ask you, please come back again in the spring, if you will, and then we can maybe take this subject further, or we can discuss. But no, thank you very much on behalf of everybody from the APA. Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to, Vijay, have you finished? Ram, would you like to say anything to finish, or have you're okay?
Yeah, I think I said too much already. I'm very happy to be here.
And the way that you managed the chat box and you could carry on with your slide and present, just shows a true professional there. So we don't normally have that. We normally do the questions. So thank you very much. Really interesting. And we look forward to seeing you next year and have a very healthy and happy time in between. So thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. Thank you.